Yes, thank you very much. And so a quick summary of that and sort of where I came to this from. I work here as the head of health technology and informatics, and one of the things that we have is a digital health collection. And so our digital health device collection is a way of getting devices for biometrics that are largely consumer devices. And out of that has grown an interest in virtual reality and augmented reality. And at first, I was never a gamer. I'm not somebody who's been playing this for a number of years. My interest in it really comes out of where we can use these in non-game situations, like education and healthcare. And in particular, we're interested in the idea of eye tracking. So I have too many words on my slide. That's a cardinal sin of presenting, but it's just to give you a sense of what's going on. There's way more than one thing you can do in healthcare with VR. Just some examples. For psychology, you could use it for relaxation or meditation, or you could use it for someone facing trauma, for trauma therapy, for PTSD or fear of heights, flying, etc. You could use it for inpatient use. There's a lot of some of the best use of virtual reality right now is for people who are facing pain. So if you have to get your dressing changed, and it's an incredibly painful process, then if you're distracted by something, then that's one way you can do that without opioid use, for instance, as a way of reducing pain. And that's something that's happening at UNC Burn Center right now. But we also have patient education. You can send someone inside their bloodstream so they understand why they're taking their medicine and what effect it's having on the inside. You can go to some impossible places. For physical training, I love the idea of physical rehabilitation. If you imagine that you're having like a blue boxing glove and a red boxing glove, you could start punching in all these different directions and then therefore get a full range of motion for that arm, but you're doing it in a way that's fun and that you enjoy. And you actually have millimeter accuracy of when someone's doing it. And maybe they could do it at home rather than doing it in a clinic. For professional training, we're seeing this all over the place. It's taking over medical schools all over the place. If you've seen the HoloLens, where people have sort of a holographic body right here, and then you see the layers come back together of that person. You'd see their skeletal system, and you'd see the bloods and everything else. And then also rehabilitation. Some of the most inspiring ones, I think, are these ones that VR is used in this way that it can't be used in any other way. So for instance, someone who has 95% of people who lose a limb have some sort of phantom limb pain or stress or trigger in there for the limb that's not there. When putting on VR, you could do something where they're moving out their left arm and their imaginary right arm is doing it as well, and it can relieve pain in a limb that's not even there. And that's something it's hard to imagine how you would do it in another way. And it's really incredibly inspiring. For other things, for stroke, same thing. Someone has a stroke and one whole half of their body ceases to respond to their brain. Through VR, you can use that mirroring sense that people see the other side of their body responding, and that helps them get back. So these are good reasons to use VR in healthcare. Uses for eye tracking. You can do a cognitive assessment, understand if somebody's had concussion, autism spectrum disorder based on the way they're looking with their eyes, Parkinson's disease, dyslexia. It's used in various settings. You've probably seen in cases of where people are flashing a flashlight into someone's eye to make sure that they're okay. So they've had various different cases. So it's used in the ICU, post-operative. In an army base, if someone's been exposed to somebody, see if they've had concussion, you can use their eyes as a window to that. It's used in neuroergonomics. So some of the people here at UNC are working on this. By looking at the way that someone is using the electronic medical record system, you can see their cognitive load and the amount of mental effort that's going into where they're clicking, and therefore isn't going into their patient care. And that's where errors come from, and that's where physician burnout comes from. So this is actually an incredibly important area as well. So empowering interfaces for the disabled is exciting too. You could take someone, the classic case is someone who can't move at all, they're paraplegic, but they can look around with their eyes and choose from an interface and therefore be able to communicate. So they could write the great American novel, or they could say, I love you, or they could say, I'm in pain, please change something about my condition. So also user interfaces. This is the way that a lot of people are using it outside of healthcare, creating user interfaces that are more intuitive just by saying, oh, no one's looking at this button that I want them to look at. What if we move it over here? What if we make it blue? How can we make that better? And things like user interface design. So user interface design for websites, medical devices, spaces. Anytime you could be inside of a 360 photosphere of a place, say if you were redesigning this library, then someone could look around and you could get a sense of where someone's looking and not looking and what they care about. So eye tracking can study visual attention, what someone's looking at. It can study emotional arousal, how much they're sort of getting charged up about that, and then also the valence, whether that's a positive or negative form of valence. And basically, one of the things that's amazing about this is if you think about the way that people look around at things, and rather than storing a whole picture of what the world looks like in their head, they'll go and look at something when they want to bring it to mind. It's actually part of the thinking process, what you're looking at that moment. And therefore, if you know what someone's looking at, in some ways you know what they're thinking about. It is a window into their mind. It is not only a window into their conscious process, but sometimes their unconscious process, things they might not even know about themselves. So you're getting this through pupil size and diameter, saccadic movement, gaze, direction, etc. And there's various forms of visualizations for that. And in addition to that, you can get additional information by taking your heart rate variability, galvanic skin response, which is a measure of stress, EEG, which is brain waves, EMG, which is your muscles, etc. So here's a basic idea. This came from the effect of opioids on the pupil dilation. So light would come in, you would expect to have a certain effect on someone's pupils. You've probably seen it do this. And then, but opioids would block that process. So if you're having a stimulus response and somebody had opioids, you could sort of, in essence, estimate their level of opioids. Here's a picture of what a heat map might look like on a website, like what someone's looking at and what they're not looking at. And here's an example, this is a GIF that kind of repeats itself, but you can see this is where someone's looking, how long they're looking there, etc. So this is what I want to, I think, I'm not an expert in virtual reality. I actually am not an expert in eye tracking either. What I think I have to offer here is this perspective that brings together healthcare, virtual reality, and the prices of all these things are happening, how things are changing. So the cost of eye tracking in VR, you can get, and we actually have, eye tracking Tobii room scale virtual reality for $3,800. And with that, you can put on the headset and you can walk around and you can track what someone's looking at when they're in virtual reality. Virtual reality is like a simulated environment of anything. You could be in a simulated hospital, you could be simulated on the moon, you could be simulated anywhere. So this is a way of tracking someone's case in any simulated environment. For $2,400, you can buy a Magic Leap headset. And that is an augmented reality or mixed reality situation where you're seeing holograms in the room around you. And with eye tracking, you do things like if there's a hologram right there and I walk around, then that hologram can follow me wherever I go. If I sit on the floor, it would be looking at my eyes as I move around. So that's one of the potential uses just as a use case. For $500, you can buy this standalone VR headset called FOVE, and it gives you the sense of eye tracking. For $400, Lenovo also has a similar thing. Teachers are using that to know where their students are looking at. And now, if you're having it on your phone, or say it's a Samsung Galaxy 4, at no additional cost, you can have that. Samsung Galaxy 4 I mentioned because it came out in 2013, 5 years ago. You could control your eyes. You could scroll with your eyes or select things with your eyes. So this is happening. Caveat, many of these measures that I'm talking about used for research grade sensors, and they were under controlled conditions. But as things move along, as we discussed before, we're being able to do this for cheaper and easier. So, rapidly falling costs, plus a shrinking form factor, plus better sensors, plus better algorithms, means technology that's more powerful and potentially ubiquitous than ever before. This brings us to the dual use problem. The dual use problem, just like a knife, could be used to chop up your dinner, and it could also be used to kill somebody. And it also could, probably not this knife, but you could also use it for surgery. So the same tool could be used in many different ways. And I actually think that this dual use problem, not of technology, because sometimes people are really down on technology. This is about knowledge itself. This is about the application of what we do at universities. And technology sort of just makes it scale. So there are ethical concerns. People don't understand the kind of information they're sharing. It's conscious and unconscious. And this is where it gets a little bit scary. You can figure out someone's sexual preference from what they look at. You can do implicit bias about whether they're racist. You can tell if they're intoxicated or not at that moment. Surveillance. Bad actors, if they were government entities, insurance companies, etc., that would be a problematic data to be giving them. Use by companies whose business models are fueled by the inverse of privacy. And there are some companies, Facebook for instance, that privacy is the inverse of their business model. And potentially inappropriate capture, storing, or sharing of this data. I did want to say that there are some positive steps, though. For instance, just earlier this month, Stanford had a VR privacy summit, and they were talking about how medical research is actually a place of hope, that because we have IRB, because we have consent, because we have regulations around this like HIPAA, and because we think a lot about the collection, storage, sharing, transfer, and context available to the data, that actually this is the world of the medical world that has to be in some ways transported to other places in, say, Silicon Valley. A couple final takeaways. Used appropriately, eye tracking has enormous potential to improve human health and the work of providers and many other areas, including health education, improving medical devices, development, and empowering the disabled. However, obviously it has many concerns with it as well. If you're thinking about someone knows what you're thinking, all the things that we talked about that are disturbing, this is a case of not being happening in the lab anymore in a controlled condition, but it's basically happening everywhere. So this is one of the big questions I think we have to do. But I think, as we were talking about before, I think we have a moral imperative to look at not only what can go wrong with these technologies, but also the damage we would do by not employing them. So the opportunity costs of not taking care of them. And so if you're interested, I'll share the slides afterwards and the links to all kinds of things I mentioned today. That's it. Thank you.
Really both of the alternatives. I wonder what comes here for privacy for young children, especially since there are critical windows and it may be critical for them to have interaction in various modalities and dimensions. And which then wash away. We've never had that some of these records can be extended into for lifetime.
Yeah. I think I'd be more interested in Gail's answer, actually. Yeah. So you were going to mention something about how childhood changes the equation for this.
Sarah?
So the implications of using these for children versus adults, that's lots of regulations. If we're talking research setting, there's regulations about child research that have to do with risk versus benefit. But in clinical care, you just have to get the parents to get the child to agree, right? But I think you're raising, I'm sorry, because truly I couldn't hear part of what you were saying. But I think you're raising a really, really important point about implications of what I was talking about in here for children and who gets to decide and who gets to know. Because with genomics, if it's something that's right then, it's going to be for the benefit of the child. There's very few parents who wouldn't be on board, but it gets into much, much more slippery territory when it's something that's really relevant later when the child can consent him or herself. Right? What were you thinking when you asked that question?
I was wondering whether the privacy has deleterious effects. I mean, if you isolated a child as thoroughly as might protect this information from plain view, that would probably be a bad upbringing, unhealthy upbringing, socially and psychologically.
Oh, yeah.
The other side.
And I think maybe we have time for perhaps one more question.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention one thing that I think is interesting about this is that the closest analog, I basically am very surprised that I haven't heard almost anyone talking about it. One of my favorite philosophers at the University of Toronto mentioned this in an article a year ago, and it's been like silence ever since. The VR Privacy Summit at Stanford, I think, is starting to bring that out, and now the Electronic Frontier Foundation is interested into it. I think the ACLU is going to play a role, but I think it's because they're thinking about this in terms of privacy. And for me, the idea of biometrics, and especially someone thinking about what's in your head at that moment, privacy isn't the right word for it somehow, but it does take it to the next level. And I think to me, that's one of the things I was thinking about that is like asking myself, why is privacy not the right word? And where do we, I guess because it puts it in a certain realm of what we think about of what is private.
I think that's fascinating. I mean, because it is farther than privacy. It's less a question and more just a reaction to what you're saying. But I mean, it's almost intrusive. It's like somebody like being able to like read your mind, or I mean, you know, and it is more than that. I mean, privacy is an implication that it somehow existed in the world in some way and then had to be kept private. Whereas a lot of what you're talking about, I mean, a lot of the stuff with eye tracking, you know, people are signing these things to do these. We're doing a lot of testing with eye tracking in information science to figure out how people interact with computers and a lot of different things with that. But you know, they're collecting more data than that, and you know, unless you're specifically signing something that says, you know, this is the only data you can use, there's just, you're letting someone in with eye tracking in a way that's just much deeper, I think, than anything. I mean, it's one of those technological precipices that we just haven't ever had to consider before, and so I think you know, I don't think there's a definitive answer. I think it's going to be. It surprises me as well that it hasn't been talked about more.
Wonder if anybody's used it in the context of struggling readers, like my sons are struggling readers, so if they're looking at text, how their eyes follow the words across the page, if they're being redirected to the beginning of the passage or starting over, if they can use that kind of technology to see how they process or how they read.
Yeah, and my answer to childhood, I'm actually less concerned in this realm about children, because if you're able to diagnose autism earlier, that can have huge effects on someone. If you're able to understand that someone's dyslexic and they're not just being, you know, difficult, but they're actually spending a lot more time on reading than other kids, then you can appropriately change their lives in beneficial ways. It's more this question of privacy, I think, of the inside and outside, but also about how it's immediate. It's not like this is some fact about myself in general, but this is your fact about you right now, and so now I can sell you something. You know, it's something like that. Sorry, I don't know how much time we have for questions. Okay, we'll finish it up. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say that I mean, privacy with genomics, of course, it has a lot to do with the fact that we used to think that we could de-identify genomic data. There was a given. It was axiomatic. If you de-linked any identifiers from genomic data, that was good. It was private. But that's not true at all anymore. It hasn't been true since 2008, when the first papers were published that showed that all you needed was 20 SNPs from somewhere else, single nucleotide polymorphism, somewhere else, you could figure out who this was. So, and then there was, it just seems like a boomerang back and forth in the way society thinks about this, because this created enormous consternation. Revision proposals for the Common Rule, which now seem to be going through, that no genomic data can ever be considered private. However, at the same time, it was like, wait a minute, it's the Facebook generation. They don't care about privacy the way people like my age do. And then look what's happened in the last few years. So I feel like, to me, one of the things that, I'm sorry I couldn't stay for this whole thing, but one of the key things is the way the technology shifts, generating or responding to ethical concerns. And then, I mean, these are so mutually interactive and intimately related, the sort of technology and ethics, that you can't really pull it apart. And same with privacy, I think. You have...
And I was just going to say that there was an interesting, Joe Biden talking about the cancer moonshot, was a line that I thought was great, that we have been able to donate our bodies to science for a long time. Why can't we donate our data to science? It should still be a conscious choice and separate from medical consent to a lot of the other things that we talk about. But why not? If I'm at the end of my life, or I've got a rare condition, I want to do something altruistic, why can't I, as a separate choice, make that decision and just put my data into the body of science?
You can.
Well, you can, although it has, I mean, in genetics, it has interesting implications because you've also done something for your family.
You got to ask your family, or not.
So I'm sorry, I'll need to wrap it up, but and this is a wonderful sign that everybody is ready to talk.